Hey everyone, M here. The topic for this week is how do we address awkward questions directed to us about being trans. And I know that I said in the last video that I am somebody who's very open about education, but I still get the awkward questions that, you know, um, I'm not as forthcoming about as my identity, um, such as how I feel about my body, how I feel about my genitals, sex, things like that that are just completely invasive and really rude. So when I'm in a setting where I actually can take somebody aside, because I will never address this in public, because that would mean I don't want to call, like, I really don't want to call someone out in front of a large group of people because that's just going to create more conflict and more tension. And it's better just to do it one on one. So usually if I'm in an ideal setting that is conducive to this, I will take somebody aside and say, like, I preface it with the three things. That was rude, that was invasive, and how would you feel if I asked you about that? Because they're probably not aware of how cis sexist that is. Because, of course, I wouldn't ask another cis person this question. I'm asking the abnormal person this question. So it's always good to kind of address that. And that's one way that you can do it without using the word cis sexist that not a lot of people would probably know. Um, and then after that, I usually move into this is my personal experience, this is my personal identity, this is not a generalist statement that applies to everybody in the trans community. Not everybody in the trans community feels this way. I'm probably very unique in my perspective because it is my perspective. It's not that person's perspective. So I usually like to point that out as well because I feel like a lot of people, when you're in a setting and they feel comfortable enough to ask you those questions and not realize how it's problematic, usually they're usually thinking about it from the sense like, well, I need this understanding. I need this information because I need to know. So, and they usually will look to you as like the trans expert. So that's usually what I like. I like to preface it with that. And then I set boundaries. That's the last thing that I do is I set boundaries and say, if you're going to ask me about my sex life, that's out of the question. If you're going to ask me about other people's genitals, that's out of the question. If you're going to ask me to out somebody else, that's out of the question. You know, doing things so calling out cis sexism, identifying that this is my personal experience, not anybody else's, and that I may be open to answering some questions, but not everybody is also another component of that part. And then setting boundaries. That's how I deal with it. So yeah, that's usually the steps that I go through in addressing these kinds of awkward questions. So that's my video for this week. I hope everyone got a little bit of something out of it, whether it was just empowerment when addressing people who ask these kinds of questions. And tune in next week.